So it looked like the first Indiana Fever to address Raven Johnson. Now, this should not come as a surprise because it's Aliyah Boston, man. So Aliyah Boston went on her podcast today to break the news to the world, how she feel about Raven Johnson being drafted to the team, how she thinks about Caitlin Clark being paired up with Raven Johnson, and pretty much the Indiana Fever front office.
Aliyah Boston has become the first Indiana Fever player to openly speak about the Raven Johnson situation. During her podcast appearance with Candace Parker, she discussed what it'll feel like having Raven guard Caitlin Clark in practice, especially after Raven shut her down back in college. She also pointed out how strange it is to now be teammates with someone who once dropped 40 on you in the Final Four. But more importantly, her take on fan-driven drama versus actual player rivalries highlights everything that's being misunderstood about this. Boston says fans have more beef than players, and everything changes once you're on the same team. It flips the whole Raven Johnson and Caitlin Clark narrative. Yes, some of the panic feels like overreaction. Players move on quickly and focus on winning. But at the same time, Aliyah knows how fast things can turn into drama, so she's choosing her words carefully. In reality, there might be a little competitiveness, but nothing close to what fans are making it seem. What Aliyah Boston just said on her podcast, because this is the first real moment someone from the Indiana Fever has directly addressed the Raven Johnson situation. And honestly, Aliyah is the perfect person to speak on it. She's played with Raven at South Carolina Gamecocks women's basketball and now shares the court with Caitlin Clark in Indiana, so she naturally connects both sides of this conversation. While talking with Candace Parker, they were going through draft reactions and brought up how Minnesota Lynx ended up with the second pick, which confused a lot of people considering how dominant they were last season. The explanation goes back to a trade with the Chicago Sky, where Chicago gave up future picks to move up and select Angel Reese. Now looking back, that decision feels rough, especially with Olivia Miles landing in Minnesota at number 2, making that trade age a lot worse than expected. That's not even the most interesting part. Things really got interesting when they reached pick number 10 and Raven Johnson was mentioned. Aliyah Boston instantly lit up and said, "Cocks up, baby. Let's go," repping her South Carolina Gamecocks women's basketball roots. She was clearly excited, said she's happy to have Raven, believes she'll have a strong WNBA career, and loves that she's starting it with the Indiana Fever. That it was all positive, supportive, and drama-free, which is exactly what you'd expect from Aliyah. She's not about to call out her new teammate publicly. But then Candace Parker shifted the tone. She pointed out she's looking forward to that first practice because it might be a little awkward, and that's when things got real. Aliyah admitted it probably will be awkward, especially since Raven is a defensive specialist who'll likely match up with the starters. That means she'll be guarding Caitlin Clark in practice every day, the same Caitlin Clark she held to 5-4, 20 shooting in the 2024 NCAA Women's Basketball Championship game. The exact matchup that made Raven a name in college basketball. Candace also pointed out that Indiana has quietly built through the draft, landing top talent like Aliyah and Caitlin as number 1 picks, making this whole situation even more intriguing. With an expanded roster, the Indiana Fever now have the flexibility to bring in players who don't just fill minutes, but actually raise the level in practice, even if they're not immediate starters. In that context, Raven Johnson is expected to provide tough defensive reps and push the core group every day, especially against stars like Caitlin Clark. But the conversation shifted when Aliyah Boston reflected on her own transition after South Carolina's loss to Iowa in the Final Four. She admitted it was strange becoming teammates with someone like Caitlin, who had just scored 40 points on her team in a huge game. It wasn't something they ignored either. They actually talked about it and addressed it directly because it was still in the room, so to speak. And that led to her biggest point on the podcast. Fans care more about these rivalries than players do. In her words, fans hold on to the drama, the matchups, and the online arguments, while players move on quickly because they have to work together once they're on the same roster. For Aliyah, it's almost amusing watching how intense the fan reactions get compared to how professional and straightforward things are inside the locker room. When you actually listen to Aliyah Boston, her message is pretty simple. Once you're in the gym with the Indiana Fever, everything from college is background noise. The past doesn't decide anything anymore. What matters is just hooping and working toward the same goal. Candace Parker backed that idea too, saying putting on the same jersey changes everything. You're on the same side now, and good teams don't carry old grudges into the locker room. Even though players like Aaliyah and Caitlin Clark have big histories against each other, at the pro level it resets fast. Candace even joked that teammates still mess with each other in group chats about past moments or losses, just for fun. Aaliyah laughed it off, but agreed, that's normal team chemistry. You can joke, but you don't hold on to it seriously, and that's basically the blueprint for the Raven Johnson situation. Yes, there's history with Caitlin from college, and yes, it'll probably get acknowledged at some point. But after that, it's done. They're teammates now, and in that environment, winning and chemistry matter way more than anything that happened before. The way Aliyah Boston framed it really cuts through all the noise around the Indiana Fever situation. She's basically saying the same thing in different ways. The fans are the ones turning this into a storyline, while the players are treating it like a normal business move. All the talk about whether Raven Johnson can guard Caitlin Clark, or whether there's going to be tension in the locker room, lives mostly outside the team environment. Inside the gym, it's about roles, reps, and getting better. That's it. And that's where Candace Parker's point matters too. If Raven is coming in as a defensive specialist, her value isn't just minutes or stats. It's what she gives in practice. She's going to be the kind of player who makes the starters uncomfortable in a good way, forcing them to adjust, think faster, and execute under pressure. So when people talk about Raven guarding Caitlin every day, it's not really about drama. It's about preparation. If anything, that kind of matchup in practice is exactly what helps a player like Caitlin get ready for real game situations. In the end, Aaliyah's message circles back to the same idea. The outside noise is loud, but inside the team, it's just basketball. That's basically the takeaway from how Aliyah Boston spoke about the Indiana Fever situation. She didn't frame Raven Johnson as a problem or even a question mark. She framed her as an asset. And in a competitive environment, that matters. That if Raven's defensive skill set is what people expect, then the idea of her guarding Caitlin Clark in practice isn't about awkwardness. It's about preparation. That kind of pressure is exactly what sharpens a star guard for real games against elite defenders. And what's just as important is what Aaliyah didn't do. No hesitation about the pick, no public doubts about fit, no comments about roster imbalance or guard depth, no subtle criticism of the front office either. Everything she said pointed in one direction: support, confidence, and moving forward. Now, that leaves two realistic readings. Either she genuinely believes Raven fits the culture and will help the team long-term, or she's staying professional and keeping any private concerns inside the locker room. Either way, publicly at least, the message from inside Indiana is clear. There's no panic, no drama, just acceptance in basketball. It probably is a mix of both for Aliyah Boston. She's professional enough not to publicly question the decision, but also experienced enough to recognize the upside of adding a defensive specialist like Raven Johnson to the Indiana Fever. What really stands out is how strongly she backed Raven's future. Calling it a good WNBA career isn't casual praise. That's a long-term projection. Coming from someone who played alongside her for years at South Carolina Gamecocks women's basketball, it reflects real knowledge of Raven's habits, mindset, and defensive identity. Aliyah has seen her develop through high-pressure environments, tough matchups, and championship-level expectations, so her confidence isn't based on hype. It's based on first-hand experience. At the same time, she stayed away from the parts fans are most focused on. There was no deep breakdown of roster spacing, no discussion about guard overload, and no explanation of exactly how Raven fits next to players like Caitlin Clark. That silence is noticeable because those are the questions dominating outside conversations, especially around rotation balance and on-court chemistry. But realistically, that's not Aliyah's responsibility to solve in a podcast setting. Players rarely go into roster construction publicly because those are coaching and front office decisions. Her role in that moment was to support her teammate, set a calm tone, and keep everything grounded in team culture rather than speculation. And even without saying it directly, her message was pretty clear. She trusts the group, she trusts Raven's ability to contribute in her role, and she believes the environment will sort itself out once basketball starts. The details of fit, minutes, and structure will be handled internally, but from a player perspective, the focus is already where it should be, on competing, improving, and building chemistry on the floor.